Hmm.
1400 years, ere seed sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste, and any other relevant local greetings to you. Welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about more Quranic stuff, problems with the Quran, and trying to get some answers slowly. With us, as always, Kash with us. Hello, Kash. How are you doing today?
Hello, JC. I'm doing well. We're going to be looking at Muqatta'at. Very interesting. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Are you looking forward to this one?
Yeah. We're not going to provide answers, so of course I would prefer that, but it's all in the process.
Great. Well, let's actually get started with this fascinating topic because the Muqatta'at happens to be a mystery within a mystery. Everything that we have seen on the show so far on the channel is about problems with the Quran, problems with the diacritics, with the language, with all sorts of things. The Muqatta'at happen to be something rather special because there are, we will show actually what they are. There are some words or letters that appear in 29 of the chapters in the Quran, and nobody knows the meaning of what they are. It's one of the great mysteries. And anyone who has ever tried to figure out anything about the Quran, they have actually spent time looking at the Muqatta'at because it's a fascinating subject. The moment that a person hears, hey, nobody knows the meaning of these things in this ancient book, everybody feels, yeah, I'm going to find it. Humans, we are like this. So everybody has tried, everybody has failed, and we're going to be talking about them today because there is much to speak about. When we talk about the Quran, there is always something else. There is always a different layer. It there is always more than meets the eye. So with this Muqatta'at, today what we're going to discuss is when was the meaning of this mysterious letter lost. Now, when we try to analyze them based on the Islamic tradition, we will get the tafsir writers and we're going to see some. And basically, you conclude there is no explanation because we are thinking, well, perfect preservation of the Quran and oral tradition. And if we don't know them now, it's because they didn't know them then. But that's not the case. If you just think about this for a moment, this book has a number of mysterious letters, which means simply they used to have meaning and then that meaning was lost. So we need to try to narrow it down as to when was it that the meaning of this Muqatta'at was lost. Another thing that we are going to discuss is why is it that we have not figured out the meaning of this Muqatta'at yet? I mean, it's been 1400 years and now we have all eyes on deck, everybody, well, hands on deck, all eyes on the ball. We're trying to figure out where the Quran came from, the language of the Quran. We have AI, we have great scholars. So why have we not figured them out yet? So we're going to answer that question as well. And also, can this mystery be solved? Or are we just going to be stuck with this mystery as something that will never be understood? Now, in order to do that, and as we go through, we're going to provide a crucial piece of information that anyone who has spent any time looking at the Muqatta'at, they will realize immediately that that topic that we're going to discuss today is one of the key reasons that this mystery remains unsolved, and that it, in fact, it can be solved and it will be solved actually quite soon. But for that, we need to actually provide that piece of the jigsaw, and it will make sense to anyone who has actually looked into the Muqatta'at before. So very exciting, and we will get there. But first, let's look at the Muqatta'at. Tash, you're very familiar with these ones, right? We've looked at them, well, every once in a while. We're always gravitating back to them.
Or they're the ones that we have access to, right? So, yeah, we can see here it's a really nice graphic you put together, JC. It's a good oversight. That way you can just see very quickly which Muqatta'at we're dealing with. So, the one that's very well known is the Alif Lam Mim or the Alif Lam Ra, respectively. Those ones occur multiple times, which is definitely a point of interest. And also, we have these ones on the right, which we see here, like Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Kaf, Kaf, Nun, Ta, Sin, so on, that each one only appears once, which is also interesting to know. So, yeah, we've got all these different combinations, and the current consensus is Allahu Alam. Only God knows, right?
Well, yes, yes, but there is plenty of theories trying to explain them, even within from within the tafsir writers and the Islamic traditions. But yes, just like you said, this is what the Muqatta'at look like. So there are some that is just one single letter that appears at the beginning of a surah. Sometimes instead of one, there are two, sometimes three, sometimes four, and sometimes five in a couple of cases. Then they don't appear anywhere else. Nobody knows the meaning. When we look at them, we realize that some of them they don't repeat. They are unique. Some of them they repeat. Some of them they repeat a lot. Some of them don't. Some of them they appear almost back to back to back, such as Hamim. If you are familiar with those, they will appear back to back, surah after surah, and then others that they just skip chapters. So it looks quite confusing, but at the same time, they seem to have some meaning. They don't seem to be random. And as we go through, we're going to see that they are actually not random. And there was meaning associated with this Muqatta'at, but it's been lost. Those are they. 29 surahs. They begin with this consonant or this letter. 29 out of 114 surahs. So nearly a quarter of the Quran has some of these disjointed letters, and nobody knows the meaning of them. People watching, probably you have heard sometimes at one point or another, sometimes Muslim apologists will talk about the Muqatta'at and say, well, you see, the Quran has these letters that nobody knows the meaning of. That proves that it is divine, when the obvious thing to consider is, well, no. If you have in this book some letters that nobody knows what they mean, the reason is there used to have meaning, and then that meaning was lost. It doesn't prove that it is divine. It proves that you guys lost the meaning at one point.
Well,
So
if I write a JC, I mean, even on the base stuff, if I write a book that is complete gibberish, I can't exactly go to a Muslim and say, look at my complete gibberish book. Only God knows what these mean. Therefore, it proves it must be from God. It's an absurd claim.
yes, yes, and when they actually do that, it's for many reasons. One of them is when you have to confirm, you have to keep saying that the book has been perfectly preserved, that oral tradition was phenomenal, and all of those things. If you have words now or these letters now and you don't know the meaning, you have to take that back all the way 1400 years and conclude that they were not known from day one, when it's
Right.
certainly not the case.
Right. The reciters would have presumably had to be reciting something that they didn't understand, right? That they were reciting Sad, for example, or whatever, or Nun, like they would have to be reciting this in memory. That would have to be the theory of complete preservation, even of the unknown words.
Yes. So these people would have to actually begin some of the surahs, for example, saying Alif Lam Mim, and then they start just reciting the rest of the verse. The thing is that causes problems because everyone listening to those verses would then walk up to the Prophet and the Sahaba and everybody else and say, "Hey, hang on a minute, what am I memorizing here? What are these things?" And the answer, say that it was only God knows. That is the answer that we would get to this day, but that's actually not the answer that we get. Like you said in the beginning, Cash, everyone now says only God knows. But when we look at the tafsir, we get a very different explanation. For example, I haven't actually got the tafsir, uh, say, screenshot for each of the examples. So they are a lot of fun. If you watching at home, you actually like these sort of things, you can go have a look at the tafsir, go one by one, and you will see how there are different explanations all the time. So these ones are just some. The basic one that everybody seems to be saying nowadays is that only God knows. And there, for example, you have one of them from Al Jalalain. So, Allah knows best. God only knows. That is a very satisfying explanation of the Muqatta'at, of these mysterious letters that only God knows.
JC,
It's like,
can I pause you
yep,
for a second? I was just realizing, so like what like we are discussing in terms of like the standard Islamic narrative justification, right? So Allahu Alam sort of works in retrospect, like as in today you can sort of say things like that, right? But the idea that all of these reciters had committed to memory, including these muqatta'at, as they were, where they didn't have a meaning, right? If then someone was reciting it and then he's like Alif Lam, wait, what does that mean? He can go to Muhammad presumably and ask him, and then Allahu Alam is not a justified excuse anymore, because if Muhammad says Allahu Alam, then say, oh, okay, can you ask him for me? You're speaking to a prophet, right? So the idea of the inaccessibility of the knowledge of a word because only God knows it. Well, if you have a prophet in front of you, wouldn't you ask for clarification?
Yes. And then what would happen is that the prophet would say exactly what they are. And the answer could be only God knows. But then we would have lots of hadiths that say only God knows, and that would be the standard from day one. When we get to the tafsir writer, that's all they will say. It's like, well, according to Prophet Muhammad, only God knows, so stop asking about these things. But that's not the case. When we get to the tafsir writer, it's like they didn't hear from the Prophet what these things are. Now, I haven't read all of the hadiths, of course, but I'm yet to find hadith from the Prophet saying, only God knows, or whatever it is. There should be some, and if you know what hadith are, are covering this muqatta'at, please feel free to let us know on the comment section because I would really like to know. But if that were the case, then why, by the time that we get to the tafsir writer, they are trying to figure them out? If only God knows, maybe out of
Mm,
curiosity. Hmm?
right.
They, there is no explanation in hadith. I don't think there are explanations of this in the hadith. But anyway, if there were, they would have been much later because these guys, the tafsir writers, they try to figure it out. One of them or some of them they say only God knows. Fine. Another thing that we see, if you are going through the tafsirs, you will come across some. I think they are narrated by, I think it's Ibn Abbas, about do not seek the knowledge of the Muqatta'at and things along the lines of even the scholars cannot comprehend the Muqatta'at, so don't seek it. There is an actual instruction to not look for the meaning of the Muqatta'at. It's like, well, that's also not very satisfying. It's in the book, so why can't we actually ask questions or trying to figure out what Allah meant by them? Hmm? Another thing is the numerical approach, and this one has quite a few different approaches. If you go through the tafsir writers, some of them they will try to figure out the muqatta'at using this abjad numerical method. For example, alif, lam, mim, each of those letters has a numerical value associated to them. Aleph is number one, Lam is 30, and Mim is 40, if I remember correctly. So you have 1, 30, 40. So that could be 31 to 40, could be 71, could be 31 and also 41. It can be all sorts of things. So when you see the writer that follows this method, he will say, okay, so because if you have this sequence of numbers, 1, 30, and 40, well, number 31 means Allah is very wise. And then number 41 means that Allah is very powerful. And you see how they are just trying to cope. Uh, Everybody is trying to find an answer and shoehorning Islam into it when it has nothing to do with it. Another approach that is actually not followed by Muslim scholars, I don't think, but from other people who try to figure them out, is they think they may have been nomina sacra. Now, nomina sacra are when you have a particular number associated to a person in the biblical story. Say, for example, that the name Joseph is associated with the number, I don't know, 300. So if you have a particular sequence of letters that when you add them up, they add up to 300, you know it is Joseph right in there. I have heard some people claiming that that's the true meaning of the Muqatta'at. However, I have tried that in Arabic and in Hebrew and in Syriac, and I haven't come close to anything that resembles that. If anybody is familiar with that approach and they think that that's the answer, please let us know as well in the comment section below. And also, please like the stream, share, subscribe, all of those wonderful things. It helps us a lot if you are so kind. Now, numerical approach, it doesn't work. It, it's quite neat, but I haven't seen anything that comes close to making sense with a numerical approach. Another one, which really annoys me sometimes, is the names or attributes of Allah. When we have some of these muqatta'at, such as Alif, Lam, Mim, you can think, okay, maybe that is a name of Allah. It could be Al Malik or it could be Al Mubarak, these sort of things. However, that only works for the muqatta'at that begin with Alif, Lam. Then you have to assume that that is a definite article. And then the problem comes with all of the others, because the majority of the muqatta'at, they don't begin with a definite article. You will have just random consonants. Now, no Muslim in history would ever use one of the names of Allah or an attribute of Allah without putting the definite article first. So, Alif Lam Mim, Alif Lam Ra, for instance, would work with this approach, but all of the others, what do you do with Kaf? What do you do with Nun? You wouldn't actually say that is a name of Allah because it doesn't have the definite article. So that is a big, big no-no. And that in there is, for example, one of the examples of one of the tafsir writers saying things along those lines. Another one is symbols. And this one is actually as well quite neat. For example, Alif Lam Mim means things such as Alif is for Allah, Lam is for Jibril, and Mim is for Muhammad, which of course there is no hadith confirming that from Muhammad, and all of the other writers say nobody knows. But then you have a tafsir writer, for example, saying, no, 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 these actually mean some important people. Why would Muhammad not be told? And why would the Sahaba not be told if that were the case? But also, as we have had other shows showing what happened with Jibril and when Jibril became important in the traditions, and also we've discussed Muhammad, we know that this just doesn't work because, yeah, that's not what it means. There is, for example, another tafsir that shows that example, and I think this one might be the last one. A secret between Allah and His Prophet. If you go through the tafsir, you will see some people saying, "Oh well, this is a secret only the Prophet and Allah knows." And it's like again a very um, unsatisfactory answer to this problem. Oh yeah, and then the last one is mystical or esoterical interpretation. Some people, like this tafsir writer, Kashef al-Asrar, is a lot of fun. He was, I think, when Cash researched this, a Sufi writer, and this guy was a lot of fun because everything that he wrote was impossible to read and absolute comedy. If you at home are doing this sort of research and you want a good laugh, have a look at his stuff here, and you're going to have a very good time because he writes poetry and a lot of stuff. Do you want to say anything about our friend Cash? Cash? Hello, Cash?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
sorry, sorry, I was unmuted. Yeah, I didn't name myself after him, even though it does seem like I did. Yeah, he's a riot because the way he writes is how do I explain it? It's like having a conversation with someone who's in the middle of a DMT trip, and it just sort of feels like they're just pulling on these strings, and maybe they're really getting at something deep, but it's just all over the place, but it's good fun. I was going to comment also on the last slide where we this whole explanation about a secret between Allah and his prophet Muhammad. This is such a genius. I mean, it's a genius way of solving the problem I was proposing like 10 minutes or 5 minutes ago, which is surely if this is like this was ever memorized, it was taught by Muhammad, he recited this. Surely when they were reciting it, memorizing it, they would have been able to go to him and ask him about it. And this explanation of it's a secret between Allah and His Prophet, it's actually, it seems to me, probably derived as a way to explain away the problem I put forward. As in, well, the reason why Muhammad didn't teach the Sahaba what these Allahu Alam Muqatta'at are is because you see, it's a secret. It's a secret between between Allah and Muhammad. Wait, are you partnering Allah and Muhammad right now? Oh no, shirk, no. It's like a whack-a-mole. You can only hit one problem to get rid of the problem. Another problem pops up, and you just keep hitting away until you have to put people's heads on the block. That's how it seems to have gone. But yeah, so yeah, Kashif, he's a funny guy.
so a little bit more on this actually. So yes, they cannot get away with we have these things and we don't know the meaning someone must have known the meaning. Therefore, it must have been the prophet, and therefore, it's a secret between him and God. Would be kind of like a way of getting away with, well, we don't know. If you say only God knows, then the next question is, why did he give you these things that you are not meant to know? Someone must know, otherwise it wouldn't be written. And this actually seems like a cop out written just to stop people asking what do they mean. But as we know now, and we're going to see, the meaning was lost. And let's actually cover that. So when was the meaning lost? At one point, these things are written down, and the writer certainly understands what they mean. For that, let's actually have a quick look at the Muqatta'at there on the left-hand side, and then that is the Arabic alphabet. Now, quite an interesting feature is that when we look at each of these, we will see that in the Arabic alphabet we have some basic forms that they only appear once, and then we have some forms that are identical, but they change the actual consonant depending on the dots, on how many dots they have and where they have the dots and things like that. So when we compare that with the actual Muqatta'at, we see that we have that one, for example, which is a ta. That one can also have a form with a dot, but in the Muqatta'at, they never have a dot. It just appears in the basic form. These are all right, and that's, out of a few of them. And then we have that one as well, so ha. But you can actually add a dot, and it becomes something else. But it doesn't. In the Muqatta'at, they always appear in the basic form, which is interesting, and never with a dot. Another one, Ain. So this one appears in two of the Muqatta'at, but they don't ever appear with a little dot, making it a gain. The same with the sin. This one appears a number of times, but never appears with a dot. So far, I think it's more likely than not that when these Muqatta'at, these letters were actually written down, people knew how to read them. They knew the meaning. They knew a lot of stuff. Some of them, it's more likely than not that they would have been read out loud as though they had dots. But by the time that they were doing the canonization of the book, or basically one of them, they had lost the meaning. And if one of those that we have just selected should have been a sin, they already didn't know how to read it. And they thought, okay, well, the shape is a sin. So we just keep sin and we don't know what it means. So this problem with the Muqatta'at had to happen between the point when the book is written and when the dots are added. By the time that the dots are added, there is already no way of knowing where to put the dots, and they keep them all in the basic form. For the most part, there are actually uh, three consonants or three letters that actually have dots, and we're going to talk about them in a minute. But another one here, sad, once again, you could actually have it with a dot, but none of the Muqatta'ats have a dot. The same with Ra, and this one is a very popular consonant, Ra, Zai. If you add a dot, the Ra becomes a Zai. None of the Muqatta'at happen to have a dot. Which one is the next one? Oh, Nun. So this one is interesting because, as you can see, it has a dot. But also, there are three different places, or rather four places, where the dot can appear. It can be a Nun, a Ta, a Tha, or a Ba. And the Nun appears in the Muqatta'at with the simplest possible form. Now, why would they then add a dot when it was not there to begin with? Because they had. Once this alphabet is introduced and the dots are canonized, you cannot have the shape without a dot. Otherwise, people will ask questions. Hey, why do you have here this shape? And we don't know what it is. You need to have a dot. It can no longer appear or exist without a dot. The same thing happens with the cap, which we're going to see. The only ones that stand on their own are the ones in green. Those, they only have one shape, so they don't really change if you put the dots. Of course, the alif can actually be a Hamza bearer, or it can become an E sound, but it doesn't really matter. It's just one shape, that's it. But there is something I made a mistake when I created this a really long time ago. The Ya is not one of those. The Ya, when it's in the middle position or in the initial position, it looks identical as the Nun. So why is it that we have the Ya in a couple of places and they have dots? they couldn't recognize them. It has the same shape as the nun. So why didn't they follow the process that I have just described and add the dot on this shape that we now see as a ya? Well, for two reasons. First one is the ya in some of the manuscripts that Cash and I we've been looking at, some of the old ones, the ya is the first one to actually get dot. There are in some manuscripts, old ones, that we see no dot except on the ya. I think it's most likely because it was a vowel or acted as a vowel more than a consonant. So that's probably one reason. But another one is because of the place where it appears. If we look at yasin, it actually sounds like a word. There are lots of words that begin with ya. So when you have this initial shape that could be a nun, a ta, a tha, a ba, or a ya, it is in that position followed by a sin. Okay, ya sin makes sense. It just feels right. And the same with the one in the middle position. The other ones they just feel off. So I think there was a combination of that. Most likely, it used to be ya from the start, and they actually got them right. In most old manuscripts, they would actually show when something is a ya. So for that reason. Then tab, as well briefly, it appears a couple of times, and it is the same shape as the pa. And in old manuscripts, you can confuse them as well with a wa. So why does it have dots? Because once they canonized the script and they added the dots, you could no longer have the kaf without any dots. In fact, if you did it, people would think it's a wa because they have a very similar shape. As you can probably see there on the screen, here they are a little bit, exaggerated, but when you see the old manuscript, they can actually be confused. The kaf is the basic form, and I think they had to make a decision between kaf and fa. Why did they go with the two dots instead of one dot? Well, in some of the scripts, all the scripts, the kaf had one dot, just like the fa. It's just that the dot was at the bottom instead of at the top. Also, I will just say this without getting into details that Murad thinks that he has an answer for kaf. And if you have his book, you can go to that surah. I think it's 58 or something like that. So you can go and have a look at that surah because he thinks that it actually means something and it is not a muqatta'at. It has a meaning and that he has found it. So make sure that you have a look at that. Now, the rest they don't really appear in the muqatta'at, and that's it. But when we look at them, and out of all of these 29 verses, we see that the majority of these muqatta'at don't have any dots. They appear in the simplest possible form. And it is only those that really, really, really require a dot that makes it just have a dot in the simplest form, meaning the nun and the kaf. That means, at least to me, that certainly they had lost the understanding of how to read these words. And of course, Tash and I would be looking at this, and it certainly looks like that. Some of them they should have had the dots, but they had already lost that tradition, perhaps 200 years prior. Right? Any comments about this, Tash?
No, no, I think it's pretty clear. The one thing I would add is on this topic of base forms, the question of the kaf, I think you put a good explanation forward, which is this necessity for disambiguation with the wa. And what you bring up also is in Surah Kaf, there's that it starts with a wa, so therefore you'd end up with a wa, which is it wouldn't make any sense. So therefore, to put dots on it to then therefore lessen the problem, it would make sense. However, it's still possible because looking at manuscripts, I'm noticing more and more that this whole question of when diacritics were added, all this, it's actually a lot more complicated. It's in the sense that, like you were saying with the yas, they get them really quickly, and it would make sense obviously because the yas, like you said, they act a lot of the times as a vowel sound, and they conjugate a root, therefore, right? And it's important, therefore, to make sure that the reader can know where the yas are. That way, it's clear which consonant. It's more clear which consonants are part of the root, right? Because you can often have the ya in the third position, and that actually isn't part of the root. It's squeezed in the middle of the root. So things like this would have motivated dotting. And in regards to these shapes, like ein and gain with the dot, I'll just put this out there. My intuition is that these are fake, that they are invented shapes way after the writing of the Quran. I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. And yes, the kaf, I think that's in the surah that begins with kaf and the pen and what they inscribe. So by the rest of the sentence being in plural, the pen is singular, so the kaf has to be something unknown that it is joined with the pen. The whole thing is a mess, basically. But don't worry, we'll get there. And this is what they look like, just as aerial shot of the Muqatta'at. And for people, particularly they don't speak Arabic, is they will see this and they will not really see any difference between the Muqatta'at and anything else. After all, is Arabic script, and if you are looking at more and more verses, they will look almost like words where they didn't get the dots right and they have done something weird. Also, you see quite a few things that we have highlighted because we realize that there are patterns that appear a lot. They seem to have exactly the same word appearing again and again way too often. So, of course, we're looking at patterns, but they look simply not random, but part of the sentences, and then something has happened to the sentences. So, this is then what we're putting forward. And the important bit of the most important bit of this conversation, that the Muqatar are not the exception; they are actually the rule. When we try to figure them out, and we are thinking Islamic traditions, oral traditions, perfect preservation, and all of those things which didn't quite happen, not how we've been told, we have to conclude that everybody understands the Quran perfectly, and therefore these muqatta'at up there at the top in 29 surahs, they need to have some mystical meaning. That's not the case. These muqatta'at, they're actually telling us how the Quran looked at one point in time before they canonized it. So it was simply, it's almost like um, looking through time and seeing the pre-canonization of the Quran and the things that went wrong. So during that canonization, and it probably was not the first one, it might have been the second or the third, the Quran would have been full of words the scribes could not read. At the moment, they are only the Muqatta'at, only in these 29 verses. But if a quarter of the Quran has these words or these letters at the beginning of surah and nobody understands them, that tells us what the scribes actually found when they were trying to canonize it. I would venture a guess that about a quarter of the Quran would have been like this, full of words everywhere. However, why is it that we now understand what the Quran says? Well, because throughout the book, if you have words that you don't understand, or basically this scribe, you can you can decipher the meaning by looking at the context. For example, if you are actually looking at a particular verse and there are words you don't understand, but you can understand that in here it says Moses and in here it says Pharaoh. It is like, okay, fine. So this is something to do with Egypt and maybe the crossing the Red Sea or whatever it may be, because you have some points of reference. So throughout the Quran, it's quite easy, particularly when somebody's breathing down your neck and you have to get it right, to make sure that the book will contain only known words. And then you have context, and it is quite easy to add dots wherever you see fit in order for an actual Arabic word to appear. Now, that being said, Murad has spent a really long time doing his translation because the Quran actually doesn't make sense. So in a way, he has done what these scribes did, but pretty much in reverse. They were trying to make sense of a text only with Rakam that they couldn't read, and they had to add dots. Now, they would have other features, other things that we have noticed as well in the Quran, such as, well, adding the hamzas, as we've discussed before, adding alif, the dots and diacritics, which is what we're talking pretty much today, and other things. There are some consonants that they seem to have changed, and if you are looking at manuscripts again and again, like Kash and I were doing, you can see that some consonants, they changed them at one point. When you can see what is underneath the text, you can see they've changed things and they have joined words and they have done all sorts of things. So that would be an easy thing to do throughout the book, well, particularly when you're motivated to do it. But it would be almost impossible to do it if it is at the beginning of the verses. These books were already circulating, so you cannot destroy them. You can only go in there, hang, well, add dots wherever you like, add alif where there are spaces, and those sort of trickery. So,
JC, like what you could do, okay, to piggyback off what you're saying. So one thing you could do, for example, is like you said, you can't remove a character from existence, right? However inconvenient it may be for you and your theology and your empire, you actually can't remove the character from the existence of the textual tradition. Why? Because it's already mass circulated. So, even whatever the Uthman tradition with the burning, who knows how accurate that really is or whatever that even refers to. I have an inclination it's referring to gospel burnings potentially or other textual material. But anyway, regardless of what it is, the question of how do you force a reading? Well, here's how you could do it. You go around, everyone has this textual material, it's in a skeletal form, and then someone starts reading a verse, and then you say, wait, why are you reading it like that? Don't you know? The scholars have told us that these first three characters are actually mysterious. They don't actually have a meaning. They are magical letters. What are you doing? You're reading it wrong. You're meant to say Alif Lam Mim. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? It's like, but look, I'm from Al Azhar University. Like, I'm the expert here. I'm telling you how this is how you're meant to read it. You guys are the ones who are unlearned or whatever. You guys are the ones who are wrong. So you can just basically um, say, so the text is there, and the three characters originally presumably had a meaning, but you could just say, no, 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 you're reading it wrong. And then all of a sudden, these become magical characters. It's quite easy. And in fact, on the topic of what you were saying about words that the scribes could not read, right? Uh, it's two things or multiple things happening in those instances, just to sort of flesh that out. It's that, yes, what they could do is add diacritics, change things around a little bit, whatever, to make a word into an Arabic word, right? That way it's native. But, and this is what they did way more than, making words into native words, because that's actually quite difficult. Instead, what you can do is you can just say, aha, you don't know that, do you not know what this word means? Oh, you're so unlearned. The word babade boogity book, that word actually means this. You can just make up words. You actually can just do that. And we can see the evidence that this is what happened is very clear when you look into what we call the whole rotten root analysis. It's overwhelming. If you check all the Semitic languages and you say, okay, they're sister languages, they can change the meaning of a root, for example, but it's relatively close to it, and you can kind of conceive of how the root kind of shifted its semantic scope, and all of a sudden there's their Arabic, jumping out from the crowd like, with a totally opposite meaning. How is that possible that that happens? This is exactly how it happens. You have a textual tradition which defines the language, which the textual tradition is not understood anymore, in part because it isn't even an Arabic textual tradition, right? Originally, right? Which is why they would encounter all these words, which are Syriac or Gez words, and they would have no connection to these languages. They don't know the words, they don't understand the way it's used in the liturgical material of the respective language. They have no idea. So they have the root consonants in the textual form, and maybe they play a little bit of it. Maybe they add a dot to an ayin and say, oh, actually, that's a gain now, guys. Trust me, Aki. You can do all these things, but at the end of the day, you can't force them to become actually already existing Arabic words. You just make up new words. So that's why these words, and like we were saying about context, all you were forced, like the only thing that restricted your interpretation as one of these scholars would have been that the interpretation you provide to the word has to make sense of all of the context in which the word is existing. However, they get around even that by having the same exact form translate as one thing in one instance and an entirely different thing in another instance. Well, you can say, okay, yeah, there's nuance in language. One word can mean multiple things. It's like, sure, you can keep making that argument, but when you deal with the evidence, the reality of this, the language of the Quran, it is more smokes and mirrors than anything else.
yes, and we know now from scholars who have been looking into the language of the Quran, and also from Murad, and also from people like the Christian Prince, who would actually point at the Quran and say, this is not an Arabic word. It never meant anything. Certainly, when we think about the Arabic from the 7th century, Murad has done an amazing job by actually going through the lexicons, dictionaries, anything that he could find and say, no, this word didn't exist. It's not even an Arabic word. And if you look at his translation, those will be the words that he would normally leave with a question mark. It's like, it's not Arabic, guys. So I don't know what to do with this. So we know that that happened, and there are scholars as well who talk about this when they say this word didn't exist in Arabic, but then they put a dot here, and now a new word is fabricated. And of course, after 1400 years, it's part of the normal language, but it wasn't. It wasn't back in the day. So
And the thing is, it's so easy for it to work, right? Because you actually have this textual tradition, which is said to be directly from God. Who knows if that was exactly the belief at any point in time, right? We don't know exactly when that became the belief. It was pretty early. Um, that said, when you have this tradition, that you have this text, everyone's kind of using it, people are reading it probably different ways. If you have this context and you have a word and you say this is the Arabic Quran, this is Arabic language, blah blah blah, that's the understanding of the Ummah. Then if a word appears there, a priori, it must be an Arabic word. So it's not a question of, okay, what does it mean? Or like, is this an Arabic word? It is an Arabic word, and now we just have to figure it out. We just have to have like debates among scholars, and whoever can make the most compelling Islamic interpretation or offer the best word, presumably, they get their way. And that now becomes an Arabic word introduced into the Arabic Quran. And then 200, 300 years later, we get, Kitab al-Ain, and we get hundreds of years after, we get Lisan al-Arab. And then these lexicons attest that this is an Arabic word, right? And then now it's been codified. Now we have the language Arabic, and this is a proper word that exists in that language, even though it was made up.
yeah. And now, because at long last, after 1,000 years of these scholars starting to really analyze the Quran and trying to make sense of it, now we have the receipts. We have what they wrote. So now we can see that these tafsir writers and scholars from 1,000 years ago, they already didn't know the meaning of words. They were trying to interpret the Quran, just like we've seen some of the tafsir writers trying to understand the Muqatta'at, and they simply didn't. So they just gave their opinion. When we look at what this scholar said 1,000 years ago about the meaning of words in the Quran, they disagreed. They didn't know, but they were very close to the time, and they should have known, particularly when, perfectly preserved oral tradition, everybody should have known the meaning of the word. Yet here we are looking at the Quran, and it makes absolutely no sense. It didn't make sense even to the tafsir writers, and we have the receipts, which is actually quite cool. But then, just going back to then the Muqatta'at with the final point is that one of the reasons why I think they haven't been solved before is because we try to find one solution for all of them. So whatever it is, Alif Lam Mim signifies this thing, and then copy and paste in all of them. That's the answer. And by following that approach, we 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 pretty much convince ourselves that it is one reason. For example, it has to be nomina sacra, or it has to be, just words from gears or something. It's not the case. It's certainly not the case. The Muqatta'at need to be approached as each and every single one of them individually. Let's look at the verse. Let's see what happens and why is it that these consonants they became disjointed. Was it because they were at the end of a verse, for example, and something just got stuck in there and they copied it, thinking that it was important when it was just the last word of a previous verse or something like that? Each of them they have to be analyzed on its own, and that's like pretty much an overall view of what the Muqatta'at are, with the spin of why they haven't been solved to this day. And the reason is when we think that it is all about the Arabic language, then they cannot be solved. When we think that the meaning was known from the start, therefore, if we don't know them now, they didn't know it before, then we cannot figure them out. So why can't we figure them out now? Because we are starting to look at the Quran, trying to find out the language in the Quran. Works like Murad's translation is incredibly useful because it shows these sort of things, particularly that there were words that they didn't understand when they were trying to canonize the book. So that tells you that the Muqatta'at follow the same pattern. And in fact, they're probably just that, like, it's almost like a mirror showing us what those writers experienced when they were trying to make sense of the Quran. They were adding the dots, and they struggled with these beginning of verses in a quarter of them, and they just left them as they are, but they couldn't remove them, most likely between the ninth and 10th century. So
So it's
I
there were two options here, right, JC? So like you're saying, it's like they couldn't figure it out. That's one option. But I'm leaning a little bit more towards they had to confuse it, as in uh, the plain reading of the segments, for example, was so, let's say, Christological or so not Unitarian or so something, or that it had to change by necessity. And therefore, to kind of get to this sort of end game of like, okay, we have these mysterious letters, is preferable as a problem to deal with than the plain reading itself. So, and to the topic of why we can't figure this out, seemingly, exactly what you said, I would agree. It's like once you start thinking about the Arabic language as Arabic as such, you've already lost. Once you start thinking about, I wonder what Muhammad thought about this, you have already lost. Once you start thinking in terms of, like you were saying with a one size fits all, they all have some kind of unified shared meaning. You have already lost, right? You have to approach them the way you approach every other symbol of the Quranic text, as a mystery. What I mean by that is that, one, you do not assume that just because this character or these characters are the Muqatta'at and the rest of the verse are proper words, that therefore, the Muqatta'at must be on its own a isolated word. Well, no, not necessarily the case. It's totally feasible that, for example, with a Muqatta'at that starts with nun, that hypothetically the nun is actually part of the root of the next word, or is part of the next word. Or that if you have, let's say, two Muqatta'at characters, that maybe the following character is actually part of that root, for example, right? There's no limits here. Okay, so to figure out the Muqatta'at, the way you have to do it is to approach it exactly as you would approach any other, let's say, clear verse, non-Muqatta'at. You treat it the exact same way. These are all characters that they claim mean this, or this one has a dot, that's a gain. Okay, buddy, I'll take you with a grain of salt, right? Approach them all like that, and you will actually gain results. Instead of this, like, basically the reason, to answer the question, the reason why we haven't solved it in all these years is because everyone is still using the toolkit that is designed such that you can't figure it out. You're using a faulty toolkit. So throw the toolkit out, throw the sin away, and start from scratch.
Yes, so we have to actually think, okay, so they didn't have diacritics, we have to remove diacritics. We have to remove hamzas. We have to do all of these things. But also we have to understand, okay, who really wrote the book? Because it was certainly not Muhammad. So who gave the book to the original Muhammad, or the guy who inspired the myth? Was the book originally in Syriac? Was it in Hebrew? Was it Syriac written in Hebrew? Was it Hebrew written in Syriac and then translated? We need to understand the context. We need to understand what the people believe and what the content of this book actually was. And this is something that is happening a lot, or it has been happening over the last 2 decades. Now we know a lot about the actual origins of the book. There are scholars and amateurs. Everybody's trying to actually figure it out, and we have a very good idea. Now we know that the book was not in Arabic, certainly not from start to finish. The whole thing was a bit of a mess. Now we
Well,
know that.
JC, just to quickly, I'm sorry, just the whole Arabic, because like I want to just riff on this a little bit, because like I think the category is a problem. This whole idea, this conception we have of like Arabic, as in it's like this unique, or this language category called Arabic, which is a dialect of Aramaic or whatnot, but it's its own category, right? This I think confuses us, because then we start thinking in terms of, okay, it either is Arabic or it isn't Arabic. What I would propose is that Arabic is a fluid category, in the sense that whatever we call, like for example, you brought up the example of like Old English, but it's even more drastic than that. But like take the example of Old English. You may recognize some words, this and that, but it's still archaic, and you don't quite speak that language anymore. Like I speak English, I don't speak Old English. It's similar but more extreme in the case of Arabic, right? People were, this is, I guess I can't prove this claim, but just chew on this idea. People were using words in the quote unquote Arabic language in the 7th century, and those words meant a totally different thing than what they mean today. The root is just different now. So what, for example, like in this context of the Quranic language here, right? the fact that it has so many Syriac words, it has Gez words, it has also Greek transliterations, right? This is very clearly a community where they don't conceptualize like, okay, we speak this. No, this is a multilingual community where they're using borrowed words from each other's languages to talk about theological concepts. So that's why you have all these language traditions all together, right? So it would be anachronistic to look back and at like a community where, it's like imagine a community in some major city in America, New York, and I don't know what context, but where you have lots of different languages talking to each other. So people speak to each other with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. Imagine then 100 years later, someone goes like, this language of many languages together, this is actually its own language now. And we call that Arabic. And then we look back in time and we look at these Proto-Arabic inscriptions. Half of them, they're not even rendered into English because how could you translate Old Arabic if you're under the impression that modern Arabic is actually some kind of like unique linguistic category related to this Proto-Arabic, right? So everyone is in this smokes and mirrors because they've been convinced that the Quranic language is in itself a standalone language, which is a falsehood. So that's just a little point on that.
Well, maybe we shouldn't just conclude that just yet, but we know that there would have been tons of different dialects, and one village will have different words to the other village. It happens to this day in any country where you go to. So that is actually quite likely. However, some of the things that we have been finding, such as the Quran roots and the problems with the Syriac and the backbone on the reefs and lots of other things that we're going to show, we are getting now a very good idea of what was in the head of on the heads of the people who were writing this book of the traditions. And we have other shows as well prepared that will show even more clarity. So now we know that it was not just about Allah is one God, that's it. It was actually very Trinitarian. So we know that, and that's actually very good information. If we didn't know that, say 50 years ago, how could people even start looking at the Muqatta'at and trying to figure them out? We needed to know that the book was very, very Trinitarian. We needed to find Jesus and the Spirit here and there. We needed to understand where they borrowed from which sources, then identify maybe the region where they were writing these things. And one step at a time, I think we're getting closer. Every time that we figure out one of the words in the Quran and what it actually meant, we get a lot closer to understanding the people who wrote the book, the intentions, and then we can, of course, figure out what the scribes later on changed, what diacritics they added, what other techniques they used in order to disguise the meaning, because we are getting to the bottom of what the original meaning was. So I think that's the reason why I really think that we are going to figure out the meaning of the Muqatta'at, and I don't mean Kash and I mean we, as in royal we, the community. We are learning a lot about the history of Islam and the history of the Quran and the people who wrote it. So it's only a matter of time before we just realize how to render the Quran correctly and find out the meaning of some, if not all, of the Muqatta'at. So it's only a matter of time before this mystery gets solved. That's what I would say.
I would too. I think it's just yeah, I mean, my attention is on other things. I think you're very, very interested in Muqatta'at, and I guess I would also be like probably the solution is very important, I guess. So yeah, it's a matter of time we just put our attention a little bit that direction because we're looking all over the place. So just a little bit of focus on Muqatta'at, and it's just yeah, matter of time.
Cool. So hopefully we will find actually some answers or at least some pieces of information that we find through manuscripts and we can actually show it here on the channel. Otherwise, if you're watching from home and you are studying this Muqatta'at, if you find any solution to any of them, as I said, there is a good chance that they have different solutions to most of them as opposed to being one size fits all. Or if you have a good thesis as to what they could mean, please let us know and we can actually try to explore it together. Or if you've got the answer, you can actually come here on the show and actually show us all. The moment that someone figures out one thing, we put it to the community and then everybody knows. So we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. It's been 1400 years of reinventing the wheel. It's about time we stop that. So I think that's it for today. Ready to wrap it up. Cash, any final words before we go?
No, thank you everyone for listening. And soon enough, we'll do another one of these streams, but instead of like laying out what the Muqatta'at are, God willing, we will make a live stream telling you what they mean.
Inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you very much for being here, guys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Probably next week. We will be back on Monday and then Thursdays. That's the schedule for now. So until then, God bless you. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Bye bye.